The message came in at 8:12 p.m. on a Thursday while I was standing in my kitchen rinsing a coffee mug I had not finished. It was from my brother, sent to the family group chat, and it said, "For the sake of the deal, do not contact the buyers, the lender, or anyone connected to the property again." I read it once, then again. A minute later, my mother added her own message underneath it. "Since you've decided to make things difficult, we think it's best if you stay away from closing tomorrow." I dried my hands. I took a screenshot. Then I replied with one sentence. "Understood." After that, I opened my laptop and began removing myself from everything they had spent 2 years quietly attaching to my name. I sent a written withdrawal to the title company at 8:26 p.m. I sent a separate notice to the lender at 8:41 p.m. At 9:03 p.m., I emailed the brokerage compliance address and asked for written confirmation that my name, license references, and documentation history would no longer be used in connection with the transaction. Then I printed every email I had saved since March. I documented the time. I documented the wording. I documented the silence. By the next morning, everything they had been hiding behind was visible. My name is Elena Mercer. I'm 34 years old, and at the time this happened, I was living in St. Louis and working as a commercial real estate compliance analyst for a regional development firm. My job was not glamorous, and my family made a point of treating it that way. They called it paperwork. They called it my little desk job. My brother once introduced me at a cookout by saying, "Elena does forms and emails for people who sell buildings." That was close enough to be insulting and far enough away from the truth that I didn't bother correcting him. What I actually did was risk review, disclosure tracking, contract audit support, title coordination, licensing checks, escrow documentation, and lender condition management. In plain terms, I was the person who made sure deals could survive contact with reality. I knew which signatures mattered, which deadlines could kill a transaction, and which missing line on a disclosure packet could cost someone 6 figures. My family never respected that publicly. Privately, they used it for years. Before I get into what happened with the closing, tell me where you're watching from. And the one word for this story is documentation. I grew up in a family that cared a lot about appearances and very little about structure. My father, Leonard, loved to be seen as capable. He liked being the person with a handshake answer to everything. My mother, Colleen, liked polished explanations. She could make a bad idea sound temporary, generous, and misunderstood in less than a minute. My younger brother, Aaron, learned early that confidence could substitute for preparation if enough people were willing to clean up after you. For a long time, I was one of those people. Not because anyone asked directly at first. It started the way these things usually start. Small, useful, easy to excuse. When I was 24 and fresh out of graduate school, my father asked me to look over a lease for one of his friends. He said he just wanted to know if anything looked strange. It took me 20 minutes. He thanked me like I had done him a favor, and I was glad to be included. A few months later, my mother asked if I could review a refinance packet because the numbers looked off. Then my brother wanted help understanding why a contractor's lien waiver was being delayed on a duplex he was trying to flip with a friend. Then there were emails forwarded to me with no context and one line in the body. "Can you look at this tonight?" I usually did. At first, it felt like being trusted. Later, I understood it was being assigned. By the time I was 28, my family had built a private habit around my competence. They did not ask what I had the bandwidth for. They did not ask whether something fell inside my actual role. They just sent things. Settlement statements, earnest money receipts, and signed amendments, insurance certificates, property tax notices. One year, my mother called me during a staff training on a Wednesday at 2:17 p.m. because Aaron had forgotten to file occupancy paperwork for a short-term rental and wanted me to tell him how to fix it before a city inspector came by. I stepped into the hallway. I walked him through it. He said, "Thanks, sis, you're a lifesaver." That night at dinner, in front of relatives, he joked that I worried too much and probably color-coded my socks. Everybody laughed. I did too. That was part of the pattern. Publicly, I was rigid, too serious, paranoid, quiet in a way they called cold. Privately, I was the first call when a bank wanted an updated statement, when a title issue showed up, when a buyer asked for supporting documents my brother had promised and not prepared. There is a certain kind of family role that doesn't look dramatic from the outside. You are not the golden child. You are not the black sheep either. You are the one who makes the machine sound normal while it is shaking itself apart. That was me. I was the one who remembered dates. I was the one who saved attachments. I was the one who knew that if someone says they will send the revised operating agreement tomorrow, and tomorrow is the day before lender review, they are already late. And because I knew those things, my family treated my knowledge like shared property. The property deal that finally ended all of this started in March of 2024. Aaron wanted to purchase a mixed-use building in Columbia, Missouri. Nothing huge. Street-level retail, 2 upstairs apartments, 1 vacant unit in the back that he kept describing as upside potential. He said it like people do when they want the phrase to do more work than the numbers. The purchase price was $612,000. He did not have the capital for it. My father did not have the liquidity he claimed. And my mother had already started telling extended family that Aaron was expanding into investment properties, which is family language for we need this to work because we've already performed confidence around it. I was not an owner. I was not a broker on the file. I was not receiving any fee. But by the second week of April, I had been copied on enough emails that it was obvious what was happening. Aaron was using a broker he barely listened to, a local lender who kept asking for revised documentation, and a title company that was becoming less patient by the day. The first message sent directly to me came on April 11th at 7:14 a.m. Can you just help us keep this organized? That was my mother. Those are the requests you have to watch carefully. Not because they sound dangerous, because they sound reasonable. Keep this organized. Review this wording. Make sure we're not missing anything. Just tell us what they need. I told myself I was helping with process, not participating in the deal. That distinction mattered to me. It also turned out to be exactly the distinction my family intended to erase. By May, I was the person tracking open lender conditions. By June, Aaron was forwarding my summaries to third parties as if they were internal status notes prepared for the transaction. In July, my father told a family friend at a graduation party that Aaron had a whole team handling the building acquisition. The team was me on my own laptop at my own apartment after work unpaid. My trusted colleague during that period was a woman named Denise from our legal operations unit. She was not involved in my family's mess, and I never gave her names. But one afternoon, after I had spent my lunch break drafting a checklist for Aaron because he still did not understand why the lender wanted source of funds clarification, Denise looked at me and said, very casually, "You sound like you are underwriting a deal you do not control for people who do not respect your time." That silence after she said it told me more than any answer I could have given. She was right. I started pulling back in small ways after that. Slower replies. Fewer phone calls. More sentences that began with, "I can't advise on this directly, but you should ask your broker or attorney." My family noticed, but only enough to become irritated. Not enough to become careful. And that brings me to the week before closing. The buyer side had raised questions about missing vendor invoices tied to a roof repair credit. The lender wanted an updated rent roll. Title needed clarification on a prior release that had been filed but not indexed correctly. Aaron had promised everyone everything would be resolved by Friday. It was Tuesday and almost none of it was resolved. At 6:38 p.m. that evening, my father called and left a voicemail saying, "Don't overthink this. We just need your help getting it across the line." Across the line. As if that was neutral. As if I was a cart they could push. On Wednesday, I received a draft occupancy statement with language that had been altered from the prior version I reviewed. Nothing loud. Just enough to matter. One date changed. One representation broadened. One line added that suggested documents had been reviewed and confirmed by parties who, as far as I could tell, had not reviewed or confirmed anything. My name was mentioned in the email thread as having already seen supporting materials. I had not. That was the first moment I stopped feeling annoyed and started feeling alert. I wrote back at 9:12 p.m. and said clearly that I had not approved the revised language, had not verified the underlying packet, and should not be cited as having done so. I copied the broker and title contact. Aaron called me 36 seconds later. He said I was making it look like we had a problem. I let him finish before answering. Then I said, if a correction creates a problem, the problem was already there. He hung up on me. The next day, my mother called twice. Then she texted. Then my father sent a message that said, stop escalating ordinary issues just because you're in one of your moods. At 4:47 p.m., Aaron sent the family group message telling me not to contact anyone connected to the property again. At 4:49 p.m., my mother backed him up. At 5:02 p.m., I took my name out of the draft checklist folder they had been using. At 5:16 p.m., I started the written withdrawal. I was calm by then. Not because it didn't hurt, because by that point, the shape of it was familiar. They wanted my judgment when it protected them and my silence when it exposed them. They wanted the benefit of my professionalism without the inconvenience of my standards. That night, I stopped giving them both. And by the next morning, the first third party had called asking why my name had disappeared from the compliance chain. That was when I knew the collapse had already started. The first outside call came in at 8:11 a.m. on Friday from the title coordinator. I was already at my desk. I had been there since 7:20 because I knew that if anyone was going to reach out, it would happen early, before the day got crowded and before people had time to agree on a cleaner version of events. Her name was Melissa. We had only spoken twice before, both times briefly. Her voice was professional, but I could hear the shift in it almost immediately. She said, we received your written withdrawal last night and wanted to confirm whether it applies to all prior document references or only future communications. I opened the PDF I had sent at 8:26 p.m. and read my own wording back to myself before answering. That is something I do when the stakes are high. I like to hear the exact language in my head before I say anything out loud. It applies to any use of my name, my document review history, my compliance notes, and any representation that I am supporting, reviewing, or verifying this transaction in any capacity as of 8:26 p.m. yesterday. If older materials are still circulating with my comments attached, those comments should not be presented as current approval. There was a pause. Then she asked the question that mattered. Was your name being used as part of lender comfort? I documented the time. 8:13 a.m. Then I said, I can't speak to how my family intended to use my prior emails. I can only tell you I am no longer participating and should not be cited as a reviewing party. That silence told me more than her answer would have. At 8:21 a.m., the lender's processing manager called. At 8:34 a.m., the broker emailed asking whether I could clarify a few misunderstandings. At 9:02 a.m., Aaron called twice, then sent a text that said, what exactly are you trying to do here? I did not answer the call. I answered the text in writing. I am correcting the record. That was all. The property was supposed to close that afternoon at 3 p.m. It did not. By 11:17 a.m., the lender had issued a hold pending verification of occupancy disclosures, repair credits, and source documentation tied to reserve funds Aaron claimed were available but had not properly documented. By 12:40 p.m., Title had requested updated written confirmations from parties who were now suddenly less confident than they had sounded 2 days earlier. By 2:05 p.m., the broker had stopped saying minor delay and started saying we need a clean Monday path. That was how the system worked when no one was cushioning it anymore. Things did not explode all at once. They became specific. And specificity was always the part my family hated. Aaron called me again at 2:19 p.m. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that lasted 1 minute and 11 seconds. He said I was overreacting. He said I was embarrassing him in front of professionals. He said I had always needed to be the smartest person in the room. He ended by saying, if this deal dies over paperwork, that's on you. I saved the voicemail. At 2:27 p.m., I forwarded it to a folder I had created the night before labeled Columbia Building. I was not doing this because I wanted a fight. I was doing it because I knew what happened next in families like mine. First, they minimized. Then they blamed. Then, if the facts stayed visible long enough, They rewrote the timeline and claimed everyone had misunderstood each other. Documentation is how you keep the truth from being negotiated into something more convenient. People sometimes think a role like mine is abstract. They hear compliance analyst and picture someone checking boxes or correcting font sizes on forms. But what I actually did for work, and what I had quietly done for my family for years, was make sure nobody moved forward under false assumptions. A deal is not just price and signatures. It is representations. It is timing. It is whether the person saying this unit is occupied can prove that. It is whether a repair credit is real, whether a reserve account exists, whether a prior lien release was actually recorded properly, whether a seller disclosure leaves something out that becomes a lawsuit later. My family had always treated those things as annoying details. I treated them as the structure under the floor. That difference is why they kept needing me. At work, if someone wanted to close on a mixed-use building, there were 10 ordinary questions that had to be answered clearly. Who owns what? Who signed what? What has changed since the original file? Which representations were updated? What is pending? What is missing? Who reviewed the latest version? What outside party is relying on that review? What happens if the statement is inaccurate? And who carries the risk if it is? At home, my family behaved as if confidence could answer all 10. The truth was that Aaron's deal had been soft from the start. He had a habit of talking like a developer and operating like someone stitching together a story fast enough to outrun the next question. He was good in rooms. He shook hands well. He wore fitted jackets and knew how to say acquisition and upside and neighborhood momentum in a way that made older men nod. What he was not good at was internal structure. He missed deadlines. He stored critical documents in random email chains. He assumed people would be flexible because he had charm. And when flexibility ran out, my mother called me. The first serious warning sign on that property had shown up 6 weeks before the failed closing. It was a reserve verification issue. Aaron had told the lender he could show enough post-close liquidity to satisfy underwriting. On paper, the number was just over $38,000. Not impossible, but tight. The documents he sent did not match each other. One account statement had a date mismatch. Another appeared cropped in a way that removed the bottom line details. The lender came back asking for clearer source documentation. Aaron forwarded me the request at 10:48 p.m. with one line. What do they actually want? I typed back at 11:06 p.m. They want clean statements, full-page images, matching dates, and a clear explanation of where the reserve funds will still exist after closing. If the money is moving between accounts, that needs to be documented too. He replied, "They're being dramatic." That is exactly how my family thought about risk. Dramatic until denied. Petty until enforceable. Paranoid until expensive. 2 weeks later, there was a problem with tenant estoppels. One of the retail tenants had not returned a signed form, and the rent schedule Aaron gave the buyer did not line up cleanly with the deposit ledger. Again, he called me. Again, he wanted a simple answer to a problem caused by not wanting to do the tedious part properly the first time. This was the real reason my withdrawal mattered. Not because I was legally central, because I was operationally central. There is a kind of invisible labor that holds unstable people together. It is not glamorous. It is reminders, cross-checking, quiet corrections, draft language, calendar follow-up, naming the thing no one wants named before it turns into a bigger problem. If you do it long enough, other people begin to believe the structure exists naturally. Then you stop, and they find out it was you. By Friday evening after the delayed closing, I had 14 missed calls. 7 from Aaron, 3 from my mother, 1 from my father, 1 from the broker, 2 from numbers I did not know. At 6:12 p.m., my mother sent a text that said, "Call me now. This has gone far enough." I answered at 6:19 p.m., but I answered in writing. "Please communicate by email." That sentence changed the temperature of everything. Families like mine survive on verbal fog, phone calls, hallway explanations, half-finished apologies, statements made with just enough pressure and just enough vagueness that nothing can be pinned down later. The minute you move it into writing, people who were very confident a moment ago begin to feel exposed. My mother replied, Why are you acting like a stranger? I looked at that message for a long time because it contained the entire problem in one sentence. I was acting like a professional person responding to misuse of her name and prior work. In my family, that counted as betrayal. I did not respond. Instead, at 7:04 p.m., I wrote a timeline for myself beginning with the first direct request I had received in April. I listed dates, document types, changes I had flagged, instances where my name had been cited, and the exact wording of the withdrawal notices. I included screenshots of text messages. I attached the voicemail files. I added a short note each time someone had tried to move the issue back into phone calls. This was not paranoia. It was pattern recognition. Around 8:30 p.m., Denise called. She did not know everything, but she knew enough from my face the last few weeks to understand I was carrying something heavier than a normal work spillover problem. She asked one question. Were they using your actual name to stabilize the file? I said yes. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, make sure you separate emotional guilt from professional exposure. They are not the same problem. That sentence helped me more than she probably realized. Because she was right. There were really two events happening at once. One was the family event. My brother was angry. My mother felt challenged. My father wanted the noise to stop. The other was a documentation event. My name had been used to create confidence around a file I no longer believed was being handled honestly. If I treated those as one problem, I would get pulled back into emotional negotiations. So I kept them separate. Emotionally, I already knew where I stood. Professionally, I became very clear. On Monday morning, the broker sent an email asking whether I would be willing to participate in a short call to clear up any misunderstandings and help everyone move forward productively. I read the message twice. Then I replied at 8:43 a.m. There is no misunderstanding on my side. My written withdrawal remains in effect. I am not a party to this transaction and should not be referenced as supporting it. If prior materials circulated using my name in a way that suggested current review or approval, that should be corrected directly with all recipients. He did not reply for 2 hours. When he finally did, it was shorter than before. Understood. That word again. It is interesting how often people use understood when what they really mean is I have run out of room to argue. By Tuesday, I learned through one of the forwarded emails that the buyer had requested an extension and a fresh document package. The tone of the outside parties had changed. Less friendly, more formal. The lender wanted restated disclosures and updated financial support. Title needed corrections. The buyer's counsel had raised concerns about reliability. No one said my name directly in those emails anymore. That was not an accident. It meant my withdrawal had landed. It also meant my family's version of the story was getting harder to maintain. On Wednesday night, my father finally emailed me directly. Not text, not voicemail, email. That alone told me the pressure had reached him. His message was 6 paragraphs long. He said families should handle family matters privately. He said no one had intended to misuse anything. He said Aaron was under extraordinary pressure, and I should try to see the bigger picture. He said the building represented an important step for the family and asked whether I really wanted to be responsible for damaging my brother's future over what he called process differences. I read the whole thing carefully. Then I noticed what was missing. No one had denied using my name after I withdrew. No one had denied that my review notes had been treated as current support. No one had denied that statements were circulating that I had not approved. That silence told me more than his answer. So I replied with one question. Was my name or prior review history used in any materials, conversations, or representations after I issued my written withdrawal at 8:26 p.m. on Thursday? I sent it at 9:14 p.m. He did not answer that question. Instead, at 9:31 p.m., my mother called 3 times in a row. Then Aaron sent a text that said, "You are unbelievable." I documented the time. I saved the message. And I understood something very clearly in that moment. The deal was not collapsing because I had attacked it. It was collapsing because, for the first time, I had stopped standing between their habits and the consequences of those habits. By Thursday afternoon, a third party I had never spoken to before reached out. An attorney for the buyer. Professional. Brief. Careful. He wanted to confirm only one thing: whether I had, at any point after my written withdrawal, resumed involvement or authorized anyone to state that I remained available for compliance-related clarification. I answered in one sentence. No. That was the moment the file changed from messy to exposed. And that was when my family stopped treating me like an overreactive sister and started treating me like a real threat to the story they had been telling about themselves. By the second week after the failed closing, the family story had split into 3 versions. The version they told each other was that I had become rigid and emotional at the worst possible time. The version they told outside people was that there had been a procedural misunderstanding and a temporary delay. And the version they kept trying to sell me was that if I would just make one clarifying call, send one calming email, or confirm one narrow point, everything could still be fixed. That was the version I knew was most dangerous. Because that is how people pull you back in after you finally step away. Not with a dramatic request. With something small enough to sound reasonable. Just clear this up. Just explain what you meant. Just tell them you were never accusing anyone of anything. I had lived inside that pattern long enough to know that just is rarely small. So I made a decision the Monday after the buyer's attorney contacted me. I was done participating in anything connected to my family's property matters unless I was legally required to respond. No more informal help. No more reading attachments after dinner. No more translating lender requests into plain English so Aaron could pretend he had understood them all along. No more letting my mother frame my professional judgment as family support. I wrote the decision down before I sent it because I wanted the wording clean. At 7:52 p.m., I sent an email to my parents and my brother with the subject line written withdrawal of informal transaction support. The body was short. Effective immediately, I will not provide review, drafting, coordination, clarification, document organization, lender response guidance, title issue assistance, or any other informal support related to property transactions, financing matters, vendor disputes, disclosure packets, or closing preparations for any family member or family-connected deal. This includes use of my name, comments, prior edits, or document summaries and communications with third parties. Please do not forward materials to me for review. If you need assistance, contact your broker, attorney, lender, title officer, or licensed advisor directly. I read it twice. Then I sent it. My mother replied 11 minutes later. This is unnecessarily formal and deeply hurtful. Aaron replied at 8:16 p.m. You really made an email for this? My father waited until 9:03 p.m., which was typical for him. He preferred to arrive after the first wave of emotion so he could sound measured. His response was one paragraph. No one has asked you to do anything unreasonable. You're creating distance where there doesn't need to be any. I remember reading that sentence and feeling oddly calm, because distance was exactly what was needed, and the fact that he could name it without understanding why told me I was doing the right thing. I did not answer any of them. Instead, I created a folder in my personal drive called Withdrawal Record and saved the sent email, the delivery confirmations, and screenshots of their replies. Then I changed the settings on my phone so calls from all 3 would go directly to voicemail during work hours. I also updated my personal email filters so any message from them containing the words urgent, quick question, title, lender, contract, closing, signature, or review would be routed automatically into a separate folder. That may sound extreme to people who have never spent years being quietly converted into family infrastructure. To me, it was overdue. The next step was harder because it involved more than just my immediate family. Over the years, they had made a habit of volunteering my availability to other people. Family friends, my father's business contacts, a cousin trying to refinance, a neighbor who needed someone smart to glance at a commercial lease. None of these people thought they were crossing a line because they had been told, directly or indirectly, that I was happy to help. I wasn't angry at them, but I needed the chain to stop. So over the next 3 days, I sent 6 brief messages to 6 different people. The wording was nearly identical each time. I'm stepping back from all informal document and transaction review outside my actual employment role. I won't be available for side review or process guidance going forward, but I wish you the best with your matter. Nothing dramatic. Nothing accusatory. Just closed. That week, the panic started changing shape. The first phase had been irritation. Why are you doing this? Call me now. Stop making this worse. The second phase was negotiation. Just help us get through this one. We'll never ask again. You know how these people operate. They're making it bigger than it is. The third phase was what I think of as tone management. Suddenly they wanted to discuss my wording, my delivery, my coldness, my lack of compassion. Families that benefit from blurred lines often become very interested in your tone the moment the lines are finally visible. My mother left a voicemail on Wednesday at 6:14 p.m. She said, "Elena, no one is denying that maybe some things got messy, but the way you're doing this feels cruel." I listened to it once. Then I wrote down the exact sentence. No one is denying. That stood out to me because, again, no one was actually denying the facts. They were objecting to my refusal to soften them. The property file itself kept deteriorating in the background. I learned pieces of it because outside parties were still trying to untangle where prior communications had come from. The lender was now asking for reissued occupancy certifications. The buyer had requested updated repair documentation and a revised closing timeline. The title company needed clarification on a release that had apparently been discussed as resolved, but was not, in fact, resolved. And somebody, I still do not know who, had apparently implied that I could step back in to help clean up the package if timing became critical. That was when I sent the second message that mattered. At 8:07 a.m. on Thursday, I emailed the broker, title coordinator, lender processor, and buyer's attorney in one thread. I kept it neutral. For the avoidance of doubt, I am not participating in this transaction in any capacity and am not available to clarify, review, verify, or support documents or communications related to it. Any statement suggesting otherwise is incorrect. I documented the time. Within 20 minutes, the broker wrote back, "Thank you for clarifying." The lender processor wrote, "Noted." The buyer's attorney did not reply at all, which in some situations is the most meaningful reply. After that message, my family stopped asking me to help and started focusing on something else. They wanted to know what I had said to whom. Aaron called from an unfamiliar number that afternoon and I almost answered by mistake. I let it ring out at the last second. His voicemail was sharp from the start. "Who did you email this morning? Melissa won't answer me clearly and the broker is acting weird. If you've told people something beyond the facts, I need to know now." That line mattered. Beyond the facts. People only say that when the facts themselves are already a problem. I saved the voicemail and didn't answer. By then, Denise had become the one person I spoke to honestly about the situation. Not every detail, but enough. On Friday, we ate lunch in her office with the door closed, and she asked me something simple. "When did you first realize your family wasn't leaning on your skills by accident?" It took me a moment to answer because the truth was not dramatic. It was cumulative. I told her about a dinner at my parents' house in September 2022. Aaron had been talking about a small retail lease he wanted to take over. My mother said, with that half-laughing tone she used when she wanted to insult something and keep plausible deniability, "Elena will probably turn it into a federal case because she loves forms more than fun." Everybody smiled. Then, 32 minutes later, while I was helping clear plates, Aaron cornered me in the kitchen and asked if I could review the assignment language before morning because he needed to sign fast and didn't trust the landlord's wording. That was my family in one evening. Mock the skill in public. Use it in private. Denise nodded like she understood immediately, and she did. Then she said something I have remembered ever since. If people only value your standards when they can hide behind them, they don't value your standards. They value access. That sentence stayed with me because it explained not just the failed closing, but years of smaller things I had normalized. The insurance form my father said he was too busy to read. The contractor dispute my mother called a tiny misunderstanding until she needed me to write the timeline. The refinanced packet Aaron dropped off at my apartment with coffee and flattery as if that made it less manipulative. The cousin who thanked me once and then, 2 months later, complained to my mother that I was slow to respond. I had become an invisible service people felt entitled to. And once I saw that clearly, the withdrawal stopped feeling harsh and started feeling accurate. That same weekend, my Aunt Linda called. She is my father's older sister, and unlike most people in my family, she does not ask a question unless she is prepared for the answer. She said she had heard there were issues with Aaron's building purchase and wanted to make sure I was all right. I chose my words carefully. I said, I'm fine. I stepped away from something that should never have depended on me in the first place. She was quiet for a second and then said, Your father has had a habit his whole life of treating the most reliable person in the room like a spare account. I wrote that sentence down after we hung up. A spare account. That was exactly it. Not just financially, operationally, emotionally, logistically. I was the reserve they assumed would always be there. By the end of that month, the family panic had become administrative. Less shouting, more pressure through intermediaries. A family friend texted me to say maybe this was all a misunderstanding and I should talk to my father, man to woman, which made so little sense I laughed when I read it. My mother sent 2 emails with subject lines like "We need peace" and "Please be reasonable." Aaron began sending messages that sounded almost businesslike. Can you confirm whether you objected specifically to the occupancy statement language or to broader file references? Can you confirm whether any of your prior checklists can still be used internally? Can you confirm whether your withdrawal was personal or compliance-related? Each one was an attempt to narrow the issue until it became manageable again. Each one got the same response. My written withdrawal speaks for itself. At 9:48 p.m. on a Tuesday, my father sent the message that finally made everything align. He wrote, We never asked you to carry this family. We only expected basic loyalty. I sat with that line for a long time, because what he meant by loyalty was silence with a professional finish on it. He meant absorbing risk without naming it. He meant offering credibility while pretending it cost nothing. He meant standing close enough to the fire that they stayed warm, but not so close that I became visible as the one holding the match. That was the real cutoff moment for me. Not the family group text. Not even the failed closing. It was that sentence. We only expected basic loyalty. I read it once, then again, and I understood that there was no version of this in which they would ever describe what they had taken accurately. Not my time. Not my judgment. Not the use of my name. Not the years of unpaid labor. Not the risk of being tied to sloppy or misleading deal conduct. So I stopped hoping to be understood. That changed everything. The following Monday, an updated deal packet circulated without my name anywhere in it. I know because one of the outside contacts, probably accidentally, included me on a reply all before correcting the thread. I saw enough to understand what had happened. The broker was trying to rebuild the file from scratch. New summaries. New confirmations. Fresh versions of forms I had once quietly cleaned up in the background. It looked thinner, less confident. Like a structure after support beams have been removed and the walls are still standing mostly because no one has touched them yet. That afternoon, my mother emailed asking if I would meet in person with just family, no accusations, no outsiders, to talk this through calmly. I knew what that meant. They wanted one room, no witnesses, no third-party timestamps, no professional language, just memory, pressure, and revision. I replied the next morning at 8:03 a.m. I will meet if the purpose is to discuss boundaries going forward. I will not meet to revisit documented facts. She answered yes within 4 minutes. The meeting was set for Sunday at 2 p.m. at my parents' house. Before I agreed, I printed everything. The withdrawal notices, the texts, the call logs, the email threads, the messages asking what I had said to outsiders instead of denying what had happened. I put them in a plain black folder and wrote the date on the front, because I knew exactly what kind of meeting this was going to be. And for the first time in my life, I was going into it with no intention of protecting anyone from the truth. I arrived at my parents' house at 1:56 p.m. on Sunday with the black folder on the passenger seat beside me. I remember sitting in the driveway for a few extra seconds before going in, not because I was afraid of the conversation, but because I wanted to enter it exactly as I was. Calm, clear, not rushed. My mother opened the door before I knocked. She had already positioned herself in the entryway like she was receiving a guest instead of meeting the daughter she and my brother had spent the last 2 weeks pressuring from every possible angle. She said, "I'm glad you came." I said, "I told you I would." That was all. My father was in the dining room. Aaron was leaning against the kitchen counter with his arms folded. No one offered coffee. No one asked how I was. That told me the meeting was not about repair. It was about containment. I sat down first. I put the folder on the table but did not open it. My mother began, exactly as I expected, with tone. She said, "Elena, before we get into details, I need you to understand how harsh this has felt from our side." I let her finish. Then I said, "I'm not here to discuss your feelings about documentation." Aaron made it sound like a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. My father leaned back in his chair and said, "This is the problem. You turn everything into procedure." I looked at him and said, "No. I turn unclear things into clear things. That has only become a problem because all of you benefited from the unclear version." That got quiet. My mother shifted immediately to the next tactic. She said no one had meant to use my name improperly, that everyone had been under pressure, that the transaction became more fragile than expected, that I knew how these things worked and should have understood that people were relying on prior conversations, not trying to misrepresent anything. I opened the folder then. I took out 3 pages and placed them on the table between us. The first was Aaron's group text telling me not to contact anyone connected to the property again. The second was my written withdrawal sent that same night. The third was the email from the buyer's attorney asking whether I had resumed involvement or authorized anyone to suggest I remained available for compliance-related clarification. I tapped the top page once. "You told me to stay out of the transaction." Then I tapped the second. I confirmed in writing that I was out. Then the third. And after that, outside counsel still needed to verify whether I was being represented as involved. No one spoke. That silence told me more than anything they could have said. Aaron finally broke it. He said, "You're making normal deal communication sound criminal." I answered him carefully. "I'm making it sound documented." He stared at me and then looked at our father, which was something I had seen him do since he was a teenager. When Aaron didn't know whether to bluff or retreat, he checked to see which one my father would reward. My father took his turn then. He said, "You knew this purchase mattered. You knew Aaron was trying to build something. Instead of helping your family through one rough stretch, you sided with outsiders." That sentence would have worked on an earlier version of me. Not because it was true, but because it used all the old pressure points in the right order. Family. Help. Rough stretch. Outsiders. I said I didn't side with outsiders. I corrected the record after my name was used in a way I had not approved. My mother leaned forward and said, "That is your interpretation." I pulled out another page. An email from the title coordinator asking whether my name had been used as part of lender comfort. I slid it across the table toward her. "It is also theirs." She did not touch the page. The meeting went on like that for almost an hour. Every time one of them tried to move upward into generalities, I brought it back down into facts. They said I was cold. I asked whether anyone had told a third party I remained available after my withdrawal. They said I was humiliating the family. I asked whether anyone had circulated prior notes of mine in a way that suggested current support. They said I should have picked up the phone instead of sending formal notices. I asked why formal notices were a problem if everyone's conduct had been appropriate. No one answered that directly. At 2:48 p.m., my mother changed direction. She stopped arguing the facts and started rewriting the intention. She said, "Elena, maybe we have relied on you too much over the years." Fine. I can say that. But that's because you're capable. You've always been the strong one. Sometimes strong people don't realize how intimidating they can be when they decide to pull away all at once. That was one of the clearest examples of my family's logic I had ever heard. Use someone until they set a boundary, then called a boundary aggression. I said I didn't pull away all at once. I reduced my involvement gradually for months. None of you noticed until it started costing you something. Aaron said, "That's not fair." I looked at him. "You introduced me at a barbecue last year by saying I do forms and emails for people who sell buildings. Then 2 days later, you dropped a draft assignment agreement at my apartment and asked for comments by morning. Do you want me to keep going? He went still. That is one of the things documentation gives you. Not ammunition. Sequence. It becomes harder for people to call you unfair when you can name the exact order in which things happened. At 3:06 p.m. My father said the quiet part out loud. He said, "We assumed you would help because you always have." Not asked. Assumed. That word settled something in me permanently. I repeated it back to him. You assumed. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I took out one last sheet from the folder. It was not an email or a text. It was a single page I had written for myself before the meeting. A list of what I would no longer provide. No document review. No lender condition summaries. No title coordination. No cleanup of missing disclosures. No review of leases, amendments, assignments, refinance packets, operating agreements, or closing statements. No use of my name, comments, or prior notes in any transaction communications. No family requests relayed through third parties. I placed the page flat on the table. This is what changes now, I said. Not because I'm punishing anyone. Because none of you know the difference between my help and access to me. My mother's face changed then. Less offended. More frightened. She said, "So that's it? You're just done with us?" I answered carefully because I wanted the wording exact. No. I'm done being used as support infrastructure and then criticized for having standards. That is not the same thing. No one had anything ready for that. That silence told me more than their answers ever had. I stood up at 3:19 p.m. I put the pages back in the folder except for the list, which I left on the table in front of them. My father said, "If you walk out like this, don't expect things to go back to normal." I said, "They already aren't." Then I left. The public confrontation happened 3 days later, and it was not planned. That matters. I was at a small commercial development lunch in downtown for work. Not a glamorous event. One of those midweek gatherings held in a hotel conference room with coffee that tastes burned and name tags printed too small. My company had a table. I was there because one of our attorneys was speaking on due diligence standards in multi-tenant transactions. I checked in at 11:42 a.m., picked up my badge, and turned toward the room. Aaron was there. So was my father. They were standing with a broker I recognized from the Columbia file and 2 men in suits I did not know. I stopped walking for half a second, not out of panic, just surprise. Then Aaron saw me. The expression on his face changed too slowly to be anything but real. First irritation, then calculation. He stepped toward me with the overbright politeness people use when they want the room to see cooperation before the conversation starts. "Elena, didn't know you'd be here." I said, "It's a compliance event." "So yes, that tracks." One of the men gave a short, awkward smile. My father immediately moved in beside Aaron and said, "We're all professionals here." That line irritated me more than anything else he had said that week. Because if we were all professionals there, then I was allowed to ask professional questions. So I did. I looked at the broker first and said, "Has the revised file fully removed all legacy references to my review history?" The broker froze. Not dramatically. Just enough. He said, "We've updated the package substantially." I said, "That's not what I asked." Aaron stepped in. "This isn't the place." I turned to him. It became the place when my name entered business communications after I withdrew it. The room around us had not gone silent exactly, but it had thinned. People can sense when a conversation is still civil on the surface, but no longer safe for careless listening. My father said my name quietly, like a warning. I ignored it. Then I asked the second question. Were any prior summaries or comments of mine circulated after 8:26 p.m. on the date of withdrawal, whether as current support or background? The broker looked at Aaron. That was enough. That silence told me more than a yes would have. I nodded once and said, "Thank you." That answers what I needed to know. Then I walked past them and into the conference room. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse anyone of fraud in public. I did not make a speech. I asked 2 precise questions in front of people who understood exactly why those questions mattered. That was enough. At 12:18 p.m., before the luncheon even ended, the buyer's attorney emailed asking whether I was available for a short call that afternoon. I stepped out after the panel and took the call from the hotel corridor near the elevators. He was concise. He said new information had emerged suggesting older internal summaries may have continued circulating longer than previously represented. He asked whether I would be willing to confirm the timeline of my withdrawal and the limits of my involvement. I said yes, not because I wanted escalation, because at that point the facts were moving whether I participated or not, and I preferred that my part of them remain exact. The call lasted 14 minutes. At 3:47 p.m., my mother sent a text. "How dare you corner your brother in public?" I replied at 4:02 p.m. I asked factual questions in a professional setting. She answered immediately. "You knew what you were doing." I looked at that for a while. Then I put my phone down and did not respond. Because yes, I did know what I was doing. I was no longer cushioning false confidence. I was no longer letting family language erase professional exposure. And now, for the first time, other people had seen the same thing I had been seeing for years. Not a loud family drama. A system built on the assumption that I would keep holding it together quietly. And once that assumption failed, the whole image began to crack. After the luncheon, things did not collapse all at once. They thinned out. That is usually how it happens when a structure has been held together by one reliable person doing quiet corrective work for too long. From the outside, it can still look intact for a little while. Then the strain becomes visible in the places nobody respected enough to maintain properly. The Columbia deal did not close that month. Then it did not close the next month either. The buyer reduced the offer after updated documentation raised new concerns about deferred maintenance, rent stability, and timing risk. The lender revised terms. Aaron tried to keep the seller engaged by promising a cleaner package and faster turnaround, but his version of faster had always depended on someone else turning confusion into order behind the scenes. Without that support, the delays became cumulative. A missing attachment became a missed deadline. A vague answer became an underwriting concern. An assumption became a written objection. Then the seller stopped extending for free. The earnest money became contested. The broker began protecting himself in writing. The title company's messages got shorter. The buyer's attorney stopped using soft language entirely and started using phrases like documentary inconsistency and reliance issue. I was not in the middle of those communications anymore, but enough of them reached me through formal channels, follow-up confirmations, and later conversations that I understood the shape of what was happening. Reality was doing the work I used to do, just in a more expensive way. My father tried one last time to frame it differently. He emailed me 3 weeks after the luncheon and said that because of my conduct, outside parties were now overinterpreting ordinary revisions. I read that sentence twice. Then I archived it. I did not answer. At that point, I had stopped trying to correct his internal language. I only cared about the external facts. And the facts were simple. My name had been used longer than it should have been. My withdrawal had been treated as negotiable when it was not. The transaction had relied on confidence my family had not earned structurally. Once that confidence was examined, everything else became harder to hide. By early November, Aaron lost the building. Not in one dramatic moment. In stages. First, the seller accepted a backup offer. Then the lender file was closed. Then a vendor who had been waiting for payment on one of Aaron's other projects filed notice. Then one of the investors he had been courting for a separate small retail purchase stepped back after hearing there had been documentation problems on the Columbia property. That phrase stayed with him more than any family argument ever had. Documentation problems. Not betrayal. Not overreaction. Not a difficult sister. Just documentation problems. That is what happens when the story leaves the family and enters the real world. It gets simpler. My mother struggled more with the social part than the financial part. She could tolerate losing money if she still had a usable explanation. What she could not tolerate was losing control of the polished version. Once people began asking practical questions she could not soften, she stopped hosting as much. Holiday plans became smaller. Her calls to relatives became more selective. She still reached out to me, but the tone had changed. Less certain. more careful. She had learned that if she wanted contact, she had to live without access. My father became quieter. Not reflective, just quieter. He stopped sending me long emails about loyalty. He sent one short note in December asking whether I would at least review a contractor dispute, purely to save time. I answered with one sentence. I'm not available for that. He did not reply. Aaron was the one who seemed least prepared for consequence. He had built his adult life around the belief that presentation could buy him enough time to fix whatever structure he had neglected. Sometimes that works for longer than it should. Then it doesn't. The failed purchase became a reference point people remembered. Not because everyone in Missouri suddenly knew his name. Because the professionals in the circle he wanted to enter began treating him as someone who needed more verification than his confidence suggested. That is its own kind of consequence. No shouting. No public disgrace. Just less trust. Less benefit of the doubt. More requests for proof. It sounds small until you understand that for people like Aaron, proof always felt like an insult because he had been allowed to substitute charm for it for so long. As for me, my life got quieter in a way that felt almost unfamiliar at first. The first month after the final lender file closed, I noticed how much time I had been losing to family management. Not just calls and document reviews. Mental space. Anticipation. The constant low-level readiness to absorb someone else's preventable problem. It is hard to explain how much room that takes up until it is gone. I started sleeping better. I stopped checking my phone during dinner. I stopped opening forwarded attachments with the feeling that I had to triage them before they spread. I put that energy somewhere else. I kept my early train into the office. I took on a more formal internal review role at work and, in January, my company adjusted my title to Senior Compliance Manager. Denise took me out for coffee the week it became official. She said, "This is what happens when your skills stop being siphoned off by people who mistake access for love." I laughed when she said it, but she was right. My own goal during all of this had always been a house. Not because I cared about performing adulthood, because I wanted something structurally mine. I wanted a place where the systems were honest, where the locks worked, where the paperwork reflected reality, where no one could casually volunteer me to solve things that were never mine to carry. I had been saving for that for years. The failed Columbia deal delayed some things emotionally, but not financially. That is important. Unlike the story I was raised in, my own progress did not vanish just because other people tried to lean on it. Once I stopped leaking time and unpaid expertise into my family's needs, my savings stabilized faster than I expected. My bonus that spring went untouched. My debt remained low. The numbers became clearer. In April, I was pre-approved. In May, I started looking seriously. In June, I found the house. It was in Webster Groves, on a quiet street with older trees and sidewalks that looked cared for without looking staged. The house itself was not huge. 2 bedrooms, a small office, good windows, a kitchen that needed updating eventually but functioned perfectly well. The thing I loved most was the front room. Morning light came in from the east, clean and steady. The kind of room that made you want to sit down and stay honest. The front door was blue when I first saw it. I kept it that way. Closing happened on a Wednesday at 10 a.m. My lender packet was clean. The title review was uneventful. The final walkthrough took 15 minutes. I signed everything with a calm hand. No one in my family was there. That was not a punishment. That was structure. Denise came. So did my Aunt Linda. Afterward, we ate sandwiches on folded packing boxes in the living room. Linda looked around and said, "This feels like a house no one will be able to turn into a hallway." I knew exactly what she meant. There is one more part of this I want to say because it matters to me. The prompt for this story said the narrator helps one vulnerable person separately from the family. That happened, but not in a dramatic way. My grandmother on my mother's side had been living in an assisted apartment for 2 years by then. She was not part of the property issue. She did not ask me for anything connected to my parents. But after all of this, I started visiting her every other Saturday. Not to carry messages. Not to report on the family, just to help with what she actually needed. We sorted medication lists. I reviewed the billing summaries from the facility because she found them confusing. I set up automatic reminders for her specialist appointments. When a wheelchair transport invoice was coded incorrectly, I called and had it corrected. It was the kind of help I had once given everyone automatically. The difference was that this time it was chosen, bounded, and clean. She thanked me every time. She never treated my skills like household utilities. She treated them like care. That made a difference I did not fully understand until then. Because the problem had never been helping. It had been being used. My mother and I speak now, but lightly. Birthdays. Occasional updates. Nothing transactional. My father and I exchange almost nothing beyond basic acknowledgments on major dates. Aaron sent me a message 6 months after he lost the building. It said, "I still think you could have handled things differently, but I understand now that I was leaning on you more than I admitted." That was not a perfect apology, but it was the first accurate sentence he had ever sent me about any of it. I replied, "I hope you build differently next time." He sent back, "Fair. That is as close to peace as some families get." And honestly, it is enough. People sometimes ask whether I miss being close to them. The answer is yes, but not in the way they mean. I miss the idea of closeness I kept trying to earn by being useful. I miss the version of family where competence creates respect instead of entitlement. I miss a thing I wanted for a long time and finally had to admit I could not build alone. But I do not miss being the emergency system. I do not miss the calls that started with flattery and ended in unpaid labor. I do not miss hearing my own profession reduced to paperwork by people who depended on it privately. I do not miss the pressure to make everything sound less serious than it was just so other people could stay comfortable in their own habits. What I have now is quieter. I know where my money is. I know what my name is attached to. I know that if someone wants my help, they can ask clearly and accept no as a complete answer. And I know that usefulness and worth are not the same thing. That may be the biggest lesson in all of this. Families like mine teach you early that love is proven by what you absorb. The inconvenience, the confusion, the urgency, the cost. If you can carry it without complaint, they call you loyal. If you ask for structure, they call you difficult. If you stop, they call you cold. But boundaries do not make a person cold. They make the terms visible. And once the terms are visible, people have to decide whether they want a relationship or just access. That decision is not yours to make for them. Your job is simpler than that. Name what is happening. Document the time. Write the withdrawal. Let reality show up where you used to stand. If this story stayed with you, tell me which part hit hardest in the comments. And if you know what it feels like to be valued most when something is going wrong, subscribe. There are more stories like this, and sometimes hearing one clearly is how you finally hear your own.